Chapter 31. Gutted. Skinner had grown more than fond of Parker's whimsical suggestion for the title Gutted. So that's what it became. He now reveled in it. Whenever he thought of it, he grinned devilishly. The chapters flowed from the keyboard with an ease that he had never experienced before. All he had to do was relive Spooky's moments of triumph. The detail, especially of the most horrendous acts, was remarkable. He knew the dark soul of his main antagonist, the resurrected Lusluspayup, better than he knew himself. Lusluspayup, a supernatural psychopath, was imbued with an obsessive passion to serve Top-E-Lo, the evil spirit. Skinner wrote about Lusluspayup with the same passion. He understood the black pathology that breathed life into Lusluspayup, and it exploded onto the page. Skinner was operating in a realm he had never known before. He now had a muse, albeit a murderous one. It took a mere day of non-stop writing to finish the first draft of the first 2 chapters. With them, the query and the synopsis, he set off for the offices of Taylor, Winslow, and Whatley Literary Agency, his former literary agency. He received the reception that he expected, cold and hostile. The first response was, "We don't want you here." That was also the second and third response. He apologized profusely to each response. By the time Martha Winslow, the senior partner, pointed her finger to the exit, he could sense their resolve weakening. That's when he launched his final plea. He smiled broadly, put on his most apologetic expression, and implored, "Please just read this. It will only take 10 minutes of your time, and if you still want to kick me out, I'll leave and never bother you again." Winslow glared at him and then snatched the pages out of his hand. She turned to head back to her office. He followed. She whirled around and commanded, "Sit in the lobby and wait. Just be prepared to leave immediately." He complied. He wasn't nervous. He knew he had just written the best 2 chapters of his life. She would see that and be compelled to take him back. 15 minutes later, the door to her office opened and she stepped out. Holding the chapters in her hand, she looked at him. Her jaw was still clenched, but her eyes had softened. "Mr. Skinner, we need to talk." Skinner quickly rose and entered her office. He sat in a button-tufted queen and chair facing Winslow's large ornate mahogany desk. Leaning forward, she sat on the edge of her chair behind the desk. She thumbed through the chapters quickly and gazed across the long expanse of the desk. The clenched jaw was gone, replaced by a friendly smile. Then she began to gush over the writing and the plot. Skinner soaked it all in. He was back. He would soon be the king client of the agency again. His conceit began to grow. Then she brought him back to earth. If they were going to represent him, he would have to change. He would have to kick the drugs, meet the deadlines, promote the book, and most of all, be cordial to everyone. If he could promise to do that, they would find a publisher. They would also take another 5% of his profits. Skinner's answer came rapidly. "If that's what you want, that's what you'll get." Never before in his life had he uttered those words. Never before had he been this compliant. But he was no longer the self-involved, narcissistic druggie living a pointless, degenerate life. He was writing with a higher purpose for a higher power, and his commitment to obey the commands of this force from the cavern was total and unflinching. The spirit and the will of what he thought was God infused him, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he had to do. Spooky had to announce the homosexual sin with a public death so horrible that it would never be forgotten, a death which would strike fear in the hearts of every sinner. Then Skinner would write about it. His work would become a warning to those who would deny or disobey the word of God. He saw his work as an allegory of a biblical sin. He felt that he had been ordained to do God's will. This was a new addiction, an addiction that was greater than it had ever been to his drugs and decadent lifestyle. He was possessed by it. He had never had much of a moral compass before. Now he had one, and he could justify Spooky's actions as being ordained by a higher power with a higher purpose. What Spooky had done and would do was odious and horrific. However, it wasn't all that different from the Old Testament, which was replete with retribution and justification. Violence in the service of God was already a significant part of the history of the Old Good Book. Skinner's mission to chronicle spooky murders through the character of Laszlo Spyap would fit in perfectly with the Old Testament. Skinner's session with Winslow turned from icy into warm regards. The contract was printed out while the two discussed deadlines for the chapters. Skinner left with a song in his heart and murder on his mind. He had several more chapters to write, and that meant that Spooky had more victims to find and mutilate. But first, he needed to make sure that Parker had the whole picture of the murders. Accuracy was critical. Parker was blessed and cursed with a subconscious early warning system. It had been this way since his sophomore year in college. A young woman that he had hoped would play him like a flute played him like he was a bass drum. When she was finished, his emotions were a ravaged wasteland. However, there was enough of his sanity left to recover and continue, although it took another 2 months to see her and not want either to beg her for a second chance or set her on fire. At the height of his distress, either one seemed perfectly reasonable. Her Category 5 hurricane caused Parker to develop an internal early warning system when an emotional attachment was within range. He wasn't consciously aware that the system had slipped into his psyche, but after that first emotional storm, he was far more alert to more than just the rising sun and his desires. He became sensitive to the nuances of emotions, especially his own. From that point on, there was always a protective distance between him and what happened to him. He had grown comfortable with it. Others feared that he was a volcano on the verge of eruption. He ardently denied that even a minor eruption was possible. His secrets and his feelings would remain his own and hidden from everyone. Neither did he want anyone to know them, nor did he want anyone to try to root them out. That little, shrouded, internal man living in his subconscious was certain that people would use his issues and weaknesses for their pleasure and his regret. Over time, that suspicious nature had bled into every aspect of his life. He trusted no one to be who they pretended to be and nothing to be what it seemed. Everything was under scrutiny, and this case had awakened a level of doubt and distrust that, even for him, was extreme. He doubted what people told him. He was suspicious of their motives. He doubted what he thought he had seen, and now he even distrusted his senses. This morning when he woke, his early warning system was blaring. Something was amiss. From the dream that he just had, he expected to be on the cold floor of the bathroom again. However, underneath him he felt soft warm sheets. A few seconds later he opened his eyes. He felt his shoulder. No hole. No blood. His mind shifted to his hand. It was clenched but empty. The talon was gone. He closed his eyes. Shit, I am losing my mind, he confirmed. He laid there frightened to near insanity about what was happening to him. He couldn't talk to anyone about his decline into dementia. He wondered what delusions he would have today. Would he see walking totem poles? Winged wooden creatures with gold beaks and bad intentions? Would he continue to imagine additional talons being removed from his shoulders? He worried about whether or not he could maintain control until these visions went away. Regardless, he had to rise and face whatever the day had in store for him. He sat up, turned, and put his feet on the floor. God damn it! Pain shot up through his foot. He pulled his foot up. Dangling from between his big toe and the second toe was the black talon. He pulled it out. He was happy to be in pain. He might not be crazy, but if he weren't, the world was more bizarre, dangerous, and surreal than he could ever have imagined. To try to convince Susan that world existed would be impossible. However, if he showed the talon to Susan and she actually saw it, he might actually still be sane. Still, he would face another problem. What had happened to him could not be explained by any rational view of the world. So, while in his own mind he might not seem crazy, telling anyone about giant mythical birds, embedded talons, and punctures that bled and disappeared would certainly have him institutionalized. His first task was to secure the talon. He took his penknife and dug a hole in one side and then the other until they met in the middle. Then he pulled out a long strand of floss and turned the talon into a pendant. With it around his neck, he showered, shaved, and dressed. He grasped the pendant several times to make sure that it hadn't vanished. With it under his shirt, he ventured to the room next door to get Susan and head down to breakfast. When she opened her door, He pressed his hand against his shirt and tie to determine if her appearance would cause the talon to vanish. He held his hand there for several seconds. The talon remained. He hadn't thought about how odd the gesture must have looked to Susan. Susan put her hand over her heart. "I pledge allegiance to the flag." She stopped. "I assume we're doing the pledge." He dropped his hand. No. Let's get to breakfast." They engaged in small talk as they waited for the elevator. Parker checked for the talon several times, and each time Susan gave him a puzzled look. "Okay, what's with the hand on the chest? Are you having a heart attack, or is it just angina?" "It's nothing," he said as he searched for the talon again. "Then why do you keep doing it? You just did it again while saying it was nothing. Out with it. What's going on?" Parker stared at her for a few moments. He opened his mouth to tell the story of the talon but slammed it shut before a word slipped out. It quickly dawned on him that he was about to step into loony land, and he was not about to do that in front of a rational, sane person. It was just too unbelievable. So he lied. "Nothing. I scratched myself and it's a little itchy." "Well, stop fiddling with it, and it will go away." At the 1-minute mark, the elevator still hadn't shown up. So, Parker suggested that they take the stairs. Their conversation about the gruesome murder of the two victims along with their footsteps loudly echoed in the stairwell. Susan remarked that she was still trying to get her head around the bizarre horror of the killings. She understood that it was a religious statement about homosexuality, but if the killer were a Christian, there were other, less violent, ways of making that statement, but she conceded that none would be remembered like these. Ironically, the murders are of biblical proportions. Susan's quip landed with a thud. Even to her. Crispy hash browns. Easy to order. Impossible to get. No matter how Parker described them, they never came that way. Even once telling the waitress to tell the cook to stop only before they burned didn't make any difference. They always came limp except occasionally when a few stray crispy strips peeked out around the edge. This morning he tried again, and when his breakfast consisting of 2 eggs over easy, toast, and links came, there sat the crispy hash browns hanging limply over the edge of the plate. Susan ordered a vegetarian omelet, and in the process of pounding and shaking out the ketchup, she launched an ounce of sparkling red onto her white blouse. Parker chuckled until he saw the look on her face. After spraying a few choice, quiet expletives at the fates, she excused herself to go back upstairs and change. Parker pushed aside the hash browns and was only 2 bites into the eggs when the unexpected happened. As Parker honed in on the hash beiges searching for some brown, a hand appeared over his shoulder and dropped a leather satchel with symbols burned into it. A dark figure seemed to glide to the front of him. His fork slipped through the limp potatoes, pushing a moist clump of them over the edge of his plate. As the dark figure stood behind the seat across from Parker, Parker was irresistibly drawn to eyes peering intensely at him. He recognized those eyes. Behind the man, 2 faint, shadowy wings stretched 15 feet wide. Parker's fork slid off his plate, fell off the table, and clattered to the floor. The wings folded as the man hardened his gaze and sat across from Parker. 2 gray hands with bulging veins came from below the table and rested on top. The long, bony fingers tensed and stretched wide. The gaunt face and thick, brown leathery skin of the frail, old man jolted Parker. He blinked several times hoping that the man would vanish. He didn't, and Parker began to tremble partly from fear that the man would harm him but more from fear that the man wasn't real, and Parker had truly lost his mind. He was now delusional. While the wings had made the man appear to be enormous, after the wings folded behind him, sitting across from Parker was a 5 feet 6 inches, 120-pound ancient man. Dark, shallow crevices of folded skin covered the old man's face and neck. The old man reached out his hand. Parker leaned away from it. The veins on the man's long and bony fingers pulsed. The knuckles were swollen. The man picked up the leather satchel, opened it, and reached his hand into it. He slowly pulled his hand out, turned it upside down, and opened it. A dark object fell onto the table. It made no sound. Motionless, Parker stared at it. It was another talon. He set his hand on the talon that hung around his neck. He felt a warm spot over his sternum. It grew hotter. Soon it was burning. He forced his hand between the buttons of his shirt and grasped the talon. He could feel the heat blistering his hand. He pulled hard. The pain in his hand was excruciating. He pulled again. The floss broke and stung as it slid across the back of his neck. He rapidly tossed the talon onto the table. It spun and settled in perfect alignment with the other talon. They snapped together side by side. Parker jerked his hand to his mouth and tried to blow the burn away. A red imprint of the talon had been blistered onto his palm. The old man picked up the talons, reached across the table, and grabbed Parker's wrist with his other hand. He moved the talons toward Parker's palm. Parker pulled back, but the old man's vice-like grip held Parker's arm motionless. The man brushed the talons across Parker's palm. Instantly, the burning pain was gone. The mark on his palm was gone. Parker felt his sternum. There was no pain, but under his shirt, he felt a talon-shaped scar where the talon had been. It was raised and smooth. Parker was again drawn to the man's eyes. Where they had been harsh, they were now soft. Parker felt soothed by the old man's calmness. Parker knew he should be feeling fear or anxiety, but he didn't feel either. The old man raised his hand, pointed his gray, bony finger, and pressed Parker's shirt against the scar on Parker's chest. You have been chosen. Chosen? Chosen for what? By whom? Chosen by the powerful spirit, Koluz, to stop two evil spirits from seeking revenge. The old man said it as though Parker had been honored, and that he was merely informing Parker of the selection. Parker couldn't figure out if it was the old man's assumption that Parker had a predisposition to accept this world of spirits. But Parker began to listen without much resistance. He was withholding judgment about something, which several months ago he would have called the nonsensical ravings of a lunatic mind. The dreams and visions that you have been having are tests to see if you really are the chosen one. You did this to me? You tortured me? You gave me the nightmares. No, Koluz did this for you. You need to be prepared for the battle ahead. Koluz chose you. Then he tested you to see if you had the strength, will, and determination to survive. And now he is preparing you for the battle. He is your spirit guide. My spirit guide? Parker had always seen himself as an atheist. The spiritual world was nonsense, something people invented to explain what they didn't have the ability to understand. For him, the world had been rational. There were reasons for what happened. They might be bizarre or horrific reasons, but they fell in the realm of reality. What the old man was saying and what Parker had been experiencing was well outside normal. It was unbelievable, but while his rational mind resisted, he found himself wanting to believe it. It was as if the old man had linked into his mind and was planting seeds of doubt that the world Parker had known was the only world. Parker sensed he was being told that there was another world. I thought that I was going insane, that I was delusional. I was barely hanging on to my sanity. But you did hang on, and that meant you had a mind that could withstand the horror of what you will and must face. And what if I don't want to believe in this spirit world? Koluz did not choose you because you believe. He chose you because there is no hate in your heart. Thus, there is no darkness. The evil Tapilo can only control people whose hate has become so strong that a deep darkness has grown in them. He thrives in that darkness. That is how he controls people. That is how he makes them his servants. Because there is no darkness in you, he cannot control you. He also chose you because you showed that you have the strength and willpower to endure the kind of pain that you will suffer in your battle with Tapilo and Paase. The old man's voice deepened, and he sternly and forcefully said, You have no choice. You were destined to face this. It will happen, and you must be prepared, and you must succeed. If you refuse to acknowledge the spirit world, you will be killed, and your failure will cause many people to die horribly. To you and only to you will Koluz give the power to defeat the evil spirits, the disciple Paase and his master Tapilo. You have already seen some of what they are capable. A woman was opened, and her birth organs were removed and replaced with another's, and she was made to devour her own. Another woman and a man were opened, and their life-giving organs exchanged. But everyone thinks that was done by a mentally disturbed religious fanatic, that this was a religious act, Parker replied. That is what Tapi Lo must make people think. That's how he hides his real purpose. It was the hate behind the religious fanaticism that he used. It was merely the vehicle. The man was under the power of Tapi Lo's servant, Parase, and he is one of many who will be used by Tapi Lo if you do not stop him. The dream world is as real as the world you walk in. You felt it. You lived it as much as you did your waking world. This is the world for which your spirit guide, Koluz, is preparing you. 8 talons ripped into your shoulders. There was blood, but then you did not bleed. You have 8 scars, but they disappear and then they return. Before you are ready to face the evil spirits, you must have removed all 8 talons. These are just the first 2. Against all conventional reasoning, Parker found himself listening and believing the old man. However ridiculous this sounded, there was an undeniable logic to it. It explained the murders, and it explained what Parker couldn't understand, the absolute viciousness of the murders. Parker didn't want to believe that a person could, of his own accord, commit such atrocities, but if the person were not truly in charge of his or her own mind, it made perverted sense. While insanity could also explain the murders, it didn't explain what Parker was experiencing unless he was insane, and he was not inclined to believe that any longer. He just didn't feel crazy. You need to understand what you are up against. The old Cowlitz shaman told Parker about the forces he would face. In the time before humans, Tapi Lo and his servant Parase were the great spirits' guardians and stewards of the world. At the beginning, Tapi Lo was content and humble, but as the world became more beautiful and filled with wonder, Tapi Lo began to take great pride in his guardianship. He began to believe that he, not the Great Spirit, was responsible for the miraculous world. He grew arrogant and ungrateful, and he despised the Great Spirit. As he did, darkness began to grow in him. It came one day that the Great Spirit told Tapi Lo that it was time to put humans in the world and make them the guardians. Tapi Lo and Parase defied the Great Spirit and refused to give the world to the humans. With a single thought, the Great Spirit thrust Tapi Lo into a river of molten lava that flowed under the great mountain Laulatla. The Great Spirit turned Tapi Lo into a giant black bird of prey and made his bones of molten lava so that Tapi Lo's bones would forever burn inside him. Thus, he would never be able to fly and never be able to leave the molten lava, for if his bones ever cooled, they would harden, and he would be frozen for all time. Tapi Lo wailed and thrashed, and in his fit of anger, he lashed out at his servant Parase and buried Parase in a grave in the mountain so that Parase would not serve anyone else. Tapi Lo swore revenge against the humans who were given his world. The murders that you have seen are only the beginning of his revenge. Many more will die if you fail. The old man's eyes focused on Parker's shoulder. Do you feel the scars on your shoulders? Parker felt sharp pains in both shoulders. The old man focused on Parker's chest. Do you feel the mark on your chest? The center of Parker's chest burned. Yes. He clutched his shirt where the scar was. That talon scar is the mark of Koluz. It will never disappear, and it can never be removed. Parker stared at the old man. He reached across and touched his shirt where the puncture wounds on his shoulders would be. He could feel them. Those are a gift from Koluz. They are the passage of pain that you must endure to become the warrior Koluz has chosen. They will prepare you for the pain you will suffer in battle. Parker stared at the old man's gnarled fingers as they played with the 2 black talons. Your preparation is not done. All 8 talons must be extracted. You must remove the remaining talons. The pain from each is your preparation for battle. It will prove to Koluz that you are worth the pain of sacrificing his talons. It will show him that you are the one who can defeat Parase and Tapi Lo. Parker sat staring into the dark sunken eyes of the wrinkled old man. The force behind those eyes was telling him that this was real. He didn't want to believe him, but he found himself thinking that the old man was telling the truth. The fear he felt left him frozen. The depth of the dread was like nothing he had ever felt. The old man continued, "Tell no one about our meeting. Tapi Lo has secret servants. They could be anyone, people you know, even people close to you. There's more you need to know, but I can stay no longer. I am your shaman. I will come to you again when it is time to prepare for battle. The shaman touched Parker's shoulder. Another shock ran through Parker's body along with a feeling of calm. Parker's head turned and his eyes continued to follow the old shaman as he walked toward the restaurant's door. With the old man's eyes and hand no longer linked to Parker, he returned to the real world. Along with that return came doubt that anything that he had just experienced had happened. He didn't want to believe that it had, because if it had, he would be thrust into a living nightmare. He would face evil forces whose powers were great enough to take over the minds of people who have hate in their hearts. To Parker, that meant just about everyone. He didn't want any of that to be real, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was. What did Detective Wright have to say? When Parker turned toward the voice, Susan was in the process of sitting down across from him. Who? Detective Wright. She pointed to the door. Parker looked over his shoulder. The 6'2" well-muscled Detective Wright, not a short, slight old man with impossible tales, was walking out the door. Parker had no rational answer for her, but if he didn't want her to question his sanity, he would have to come up with an answer, and it would have to be a lie. He was too shocked to do it well. Well, it was just that that he wanted to know what we have discovered so far. She looked at Parker suspiciously. Which was what? That we or rather L.A. Skinner found some writing in blood on the wall at Lambda. It was in Latin and I can't remember it, but Detective Martin translated it, and it's about the sin of a man laying with a man and a woman laying with a woman. You mean homosexuality? Yes. But from the sight of the body dump and the switching of the organs that was kind of obvious. Yeah, but this confirms it. So, it has strong religious overtones? I guess so, or it's pretending to have them. Then he involuntarily touched his chest. The scar was still there. One part of him wanted to tear his shirt open and find out if she saw the talon-shaped scar. Another part of him was far too afraid that she wouldn't see it, and that would mean that he was delusional. Are you okay? You look a little off. In fact, you've been acting strangely since we arrived here. I'm fine, just a little tired. I don't sleep well on these hotel beds. So, it's just the bed? Not only the bed. I've got a lot of history here, and that might be bothering me. You mean like Detective Martin? Yeah. And now something else. Well, get over it. We've got a case to solve before this maniac. Spooky. Kills again. Passe. Parker mumbled quietly. What? I said let's push on. After I finish my breakfast. Parker noted a suspicious look from Susan. He wanted her to probe no deeper. His attempt to cover the passe slip felt awkward and unconvincing. So, he focused her attention on herself. He signaled the waitress. She came. She needs a bib. Funny, Susan snickered. Parker felt that he had succeeded. He should feel honored. He should be able to relax. After all, he had been chosen. Still, he felt like he was walking into a pitch-black room with a shifting floor. Chapter 32. Passe, the gatekeeper, the guardian. Anjanette Zitzman had a name that was impossible to forget and a face that was unlikely to be remembered. She was pleasant-looking enough, but there was just nothing memorable about her. Someone would see her 3 days in a row, and on the 4th day, he would swear that he had never seen her before. She had a bite to her personality but wasn't cruel enough to be popular. She was short, petite, and very bright. The University of British Columbia brought relief to her. The beautiful people from high school were loitering around the community college waiting to drop out. They had become a distant memory as her college career blossomed. Her name could be found on the dean's list with unwavering regularity. Love struck her junior year, and all was right in the world. Halfway through her senior year, she had her first episode. She found herself, rather her roommate found her, wandering the halls of the dorm on the other side of the campus. She didn't seem to have any idea where she was or how she got there or why she was there. It took her several minutes for her to recognize her roommate. The next day she was back to normal. Several weeks later it happened again. This time she was found at 2 a.m. sitting on the steps of the library. Her hands flicked about as she talked about the state of humankind and the extinction of the dinosaurs. It wasn't that the connection was illogical, because it could be argued that humans were well on their way to extinction for the same reason as the dinosaur, a changing environment. But that wasn't her reasoning. In fact, it was hard to tell what her reasoning was because she rambled incessantly, injecting comments that had no connection to her general thesis. At best, her reasoning was erratic. And so was her index finger as she stabbed emphatically at the stars. By the second quarter, she couldn't make it to class because, as she said, "I'm waiting for them to come." She wouldn't tell anyone who they were because that would put them in danger. But with them would come solutions to all of humankind's problems. The ozone layer and spray cans were a dominant concern. She was collecting and purchasing as many spray cans as she could and storing them in a local storage facility to prevent their use. Her family tried to get her help, but she claimed that she had never experienced such clarity of purpose. Therefore, nothing was wrong with her, and they were merely trying to ruin her relationship with the people to whom she had a special connection. Shortly after an attempted third intervention, she couldn't be found anywhere on campus. When her obsession over the special relationship with the visitors occupied the bulk of conversations with her boyfriend, their relationship became severely strained. Unfortunately, one afternoon after she initiated an extensive discussion of their impending arrival, he questioned the mere existence of them. She froze him with a piercing stare, gave him the back of her hand, stomped into the bedroom, and returned with a large pair of scissors. To her, he had, obviously, been recruited by the SI's Canadian Security Intelligence Service to thwart their arrival. Taking the scissors as a statement of intent, he immediately cut ties with her and never saw her again. In fact, no one who knew her had seen her since then. Over the weeks that followed, she began moving items from the storage facility. She also gathered other essential items that the visitors needed for their stay on planet Earth. She filled 2 shopping carts with treasured supplies until nothing more would fit. Then she pushed one cart and dragged the other and stashed the contents in a deserted, dilapidated warehouse in a small forgotten industrial area of Vancouver. This she did daily. During her preparation for their arrival, she ate what she could find behind restaurants and supermarkets. It wasn't much, but she didn't need much. She was fueled by her disorder, and it was high octane. Each night, in a dark corner of the warehouse, she waited for their arrival. It was 1 a.m. when Anjanette crossed at the corner of Heatley and Powell in one of the few remaining undeveloped sections of Gastown. Her jeans showed the 3 months of filth that she had gathered from the streets, alleys, and warehouse. Under her insulated nylon jacket, she wore no bra. However, as emaciated as she had become, there was little need. Under her jeans, she wore no underwear. Late one evening, she was pushing and pulling another pair of loaded shopping carts. Her pace across the street was slow and jittery. Halfway across, she had to stop and gather her strength to go on. But she was inspired by a future with celestial beings who were in constant contact with her. So on she pushed and pulled. A car stopped at the crosswalk 2 feet from the front cart. The horn blared out 3 sharp, harsh notes. Anjanette took her hand off the front cart and introduced the 3 teenagers to her version of Shove It. That's when the windows went down, the heads went out, and the threats flew at her. With the knowledge that her future would be in the stars, she merely trudged on, slowly and steadily heading south on Heatley. In the 5 minutes that it took her to cover half a block, she had erased the confrontation from her mind. Ahead lay a dreaded obstacle, the entrance to an alley. Trying to cross the alley became a massive undertaking. At the entrance, the sidewalk slope turned the cart toward the street. She struggled to hold it on line, but when she pulled it to the left, the cart leaned and tumbled toward the street. She was horrified. She fell to her knees and beat the pavement with her fists. "Look, Jay! The bitch is having a cart attack." Anjanette looked over her shoulder. Hovering nearby, laughing, were the 3 teenagers. She sneered at them and reached out to pick up an ancient modem card. As her hand touched the card, it was kicked into the street. It was accompanied by a string of obscene insults and followed by a kicked cart. She hissed like a snake, hunched her shoulders, and threw herself onto the cart, stretching her arms out to protect it. She looked to the sky and begged, "Please help me. Here's some help, you filthy cunt." She felt a hand grab her coat and pull. She slipped her fingers around the cart's metal bars and gripped tightly. The pull was harder. With what strength she had left, she held on to the shreds of her delusional life. Her coat was released. Over the cart and onto the street flew one of the teenagers. She heard a loud grunt and then a thud. Still protecting the cart, she looked over her shoulder and saw one of the teens flying into the brick wall of the building behind her. With fear covering their faces, the three teenagers scrambled to their feet and ran to their car. Walking into her view came a dark-clad, hooded figure. She looked up into the hood. It was like looking into an endless black hole. She shivered, but then looked quizzically at the man. "It's you, isn't it? You came. You came. Thank you. I've been waiting for you, gathering the things that you wanted. I've been waiting so long, but now you're here. I knew you'd come. Yes, I'm here. You don't have to worry any longer. I will protect you. Now let's gather up this stuff. We'll put it in the trunk of my special vehicle, and you can take me where you have the rest of our supplies." The car was only 20 feet away. As the man briefly passed through the light of a lamppost, she saw his face. It was dark, wrinkled, and creased with deep lines. The eyes were misshapen holes, the nostrils shriveled and cracked. She fought her repulsion and found her mind turning the horrid vision into an acceptable one. These were, after all, from another world. She smiled. It took 10 minutes to put 2 carts worth into the trunk. Anjanette directed him to the deserted warehouse. They unloaded the car, and Anjanette sorted them into the neat rows and columns that she had arranged on the floor of the warehouse. There were 10 cartloads of items. "Would you care for something to eat?" she asked. "No, my kind does not need food to survive." Anjanette ate what little food she had collected. Then the weariness of the months of preparation overcame her, and she lay on the cold concrete to sleep. In minutes, she was deep into a nightmare. A hand touched her head and then held it firmly. Someone was straddling her body and pinning her arms to her sides. She opened her eyes. Coming toward her was a hand holding a 4-inch-long plastic cylinder with a light-colored liquid. Twisting her head side to side, she struggled, but she was too weak. She felt a pinch on her neck, and then her world drifted into mindless darkness. There was a warm golden glow surrounding Anjanette when she opened her eyes. In a few seconds, she was able to focus. She was in a cavern. Above her were several hundred petroglyphs. She sat up. In front of her stood the dark-clad figure who had rescued her. She smiled. She was excited. She would no longer be alone. To her, the cavern was a sanctuary, the earthly home of celestial travelers, and she was going to be one of them. The dark figure spoke. "I am the gatekeeper. I am Paase, guardian of Top Elo. Top Elo has chosen you to help me send a message." He held his arms outstretched to the dome and turned around in a full circle. "Our message will require a great sacrifice from you." "What is his message?" "Propteria tradidit illos deus in passiones ignominii, nam femini eram immutavert naturalem, usum in eum, usum ca est contra naturam. Similiter autem et masculi relicto naturali, usu femini exarcerant in desiderius sui, in invisum masculi in masculos turpitudinem operans et merstem quam, opertuit auroris sui in submet ipsis recipients." Anjanette more than heard the verses. She felt them down to her very soul. Whatever sacrifice was asked of her, she would willingly make. For the first time in months, her mind was calm. The confusion of colliding thoughts had stopped. She relished the part she would have to play even though she had no idea what it was. "It is time for you to sleep." Petroglyphs swirled around Paase. He put his hand on her forehead just above her eyes. The petroglyphs rode down his arms and into her eyes. She jerked. Her eyes turned entirely black, and then a pinpoint of soft golden light grew until her eyes glowed. Reflected in her golden eyes were the swirling petroglyphs. She went limp. He carefully laid her head onto the hard ground. Chapter 33. Slick, your master awaits. Slick's struggle. His name was Andrew Teller, but everyone called him Slick. Slick loved basketball, and for a while it loved him, but an estranged alcoholic mother who was killed in a disagreement over the price of a back-alley blowjob, and an abusive father who was jealous of Slick's high school basketball fame became too much of a weight to carry. A beer here and there provided relief. Then beer and a chaser of whiskey provided longer, deeper relief. At first, he offered resistance to alcohol's control, but the inevitable happened. In his senior year, the alcohol began to hate basketball. It willingly eroded Slick's prodigious skills and, in turn, that ate at his soul. The slump became another reason to drink, and by the third game, he had left the team and school to pursue his new first love full-time. A year later, Slick's love affair with booze had finally brought him down, and then shortly after deposited him into a refrigerator box that was tucked away in a thicket at the edge of Seattle. The cardboard was thick and would last through the winter, so it became home. By the time he was 25 years old, none of his friends even knew that he was still alive. If they saw him, they wouldn't recognize him, and he wouldn't want them to. It had been 2 days since Slick had eaten, but only hours since he had run out of alcohol. His refrigerator box home was beginning to sag with each new rain and each foggy morning. He couldn't stay dry, and he couldn't get warm, and the alcohol which was meant to help had ceased to aid a while back. By midnight, the pangs of hunger and the cold damp had driven him from his collapsing home. It was going to be a long walk to the nearest dumpster, which was behind the Drexler supermarket. He was trembling from the wet and cold. With each step, he could feel his muscles tightening and his joints stiffening, and he still had more than a mile to go. He trudged forward, staying out of sight just inside the tree line. With each step, the half-decayed, mud-soaked leaves seeped deeper into his ripped, severely frayed and thin-soled Vans. He wore no socks. They were a luxury, an extravagance. The muddy debris made currents under, over, and around his feet, settling in crevices between his toes and spaces in the shoes. The toenails on his big toes had grown so long that they had been cutting their way through the ends of his sneakers. The knuckles of his toes had swollen. They ached and sent shooting pains across his arch and up his heel. It had become so much a part of his daily life that it no longer registered on his face. He just felt it. Only rarely did a car's lights shine through the trees, laying dark bars across his path. More than anything, he felt alone and had been alone for a long time. Tonight, more than ever, his condition made him painfully aware of his solitary world. He could feel death closing in, and he had nearly no desire to stave it off any longer. This was as close as he had ever been to truly wishing his life would end. He hoped that he would get lucky and die before another day of this life began. With a mere half of a mile to go to the market, a fallen branch snagged a rip in his shoe and threw him into the cold mud. He felt a sharp pain on the side of the foot that had been snagged. The front of him was covered in mud and wet leaves. The palms of his hands were thick with mud. He pushed himself to his knees. The pain surged again. He reached back and touched the branch. The pain rushed as he grasped the branch. He pulled hard. The pain ripped through him. The branch was out. His foot ached even more. He slowly and carefully climbed to his feet. At first, he could put only a little pressure on the foot. But with each step, he could stand the pain a little more, but never enough to stop limping. The long, hard journey was taking longer and becoming much harder. Weaving through the trees made the footing treacherous. He stumbled several times, and each time that he faltered, a searing pain streaked up his leg. After he retrieved his balance following the third stagger, he could see the supermarket. It was only 50 yards away. Still, the distance grew with the pain. In a few minutes, he would be at the parking lot. It was large and well lit. so he couldn't chance crossing the long paved expanse. Staying hidden in the tree line was critical. He worked his way along the sides of the parking lot to the back of the store. The dull, light-headed feeling that he lived with every day struck harder. He braced himself against a lamppost. His eyes lost focus. He wrapped his arm around the post and slid to the pavement and let the veil of darkness fall around him. When he woke, he could see rain running down in long streaks. Then they were whisked away and the pattern repeated each time with the sound of a slap. As his mind cleared, he realized that he was watching the windshield wipers of a car. There was an odor of cooked beef. It was strong and inviting. Go ahead. Eat. It looks like you need it. It must have been days since you've eaten. There's a little something to drink too, once you get something in your stomach. The voice was friendly, even compassionate. Slick didn't look up. All he could see and smell was the food. He took a cautious first bite and then devoured the rest of the hamburger. Then he ravenously ate another as he drank a Coke. It was only when he was done that he became frightened. This was how the homeless died, at the hands of a psychotic Good Samaritan. The driver's shoulders appeared to be broad, his chest thick. Only the dash lights illuminated the man's head, which a dark hoodie covered. Only the tip of his nose could be seen. It appeared to have the skin pulled back. Slick pushed himself against the passenger door and searched for the handle as he looked at the driver. Now, you don't want to leave before we come to the best part. The man raised a bottle of Jack Daniels from the floorboard. Slick stopped. A short distance away was relief. Another chance to push the memories down. Another chance to feel nothing. Another chance to calm the tremors. His insides were churning and his head hurt. He stared longingly at the bottle and stopped searching for the door handle. The bottle was thrust a foot from his face. He reached slowly for it and then snatched it as if he feared someone would pull it away from him and force him to see his life for what it really was. He wrenched the cap off and tipped the bottle to his mouth. It flowed easily and felt like snow melting in his throat. He feared that this wouldn't last. So, he didn't stop drinking until he forgot where his life had taken him. Nearly 2/3 of the bottle was gone when his world finally disappeared. "Nighty-night, Slick. Your master awaits you," his savior said.